his journey, a very long, intense, and painful week. He is making the ultimate sacrifice for all of us by taking beatings, by his death on the cross. We come to the ultimate in grace and forgiveness provided by our Lord. And there was a lady, Karen Blixen. She was Danish by birth. She lived in British East Africa from 1914 to 1931. She got a divorce at that time and returned to Denmark. She wrote about that in her memoir called Out of Africa. It won a lot of awards for the book. It became a movie with big stars, and the Academy rewarded that story very well. And when she returned back to Denmark, she continued to write. And she wrote under the pseudonym Dennison. And she wrote another story called Babette's Feast that won acclaim and was popularized in a movie in the 1980s. And the background of that story is a father and his two adult daughters start a mission in a poor coastal town in Norway. And the two teenage daughters were named Martine, after Martin Luther, and the other girl was named Philippa. And they had worship every week following the teachings of Martin Luther. And Martine received a proposal from a cavalry officer, but she turned it down because as her father was aging, she didn't know who would take care of him and how they would continue to run the mission. Philippa was an amazing singer, and there was an opera singer who had come to the coastal town to recoup from some injuries, and he heard her outside singing and offered to teach her to sing in an opera-style voice and for her to come back with him to Paris and become a singer like him. He could give her all the finest things Paris had to offer. And they would dine at the best Parisian restaurant called Café Anglais. But she stayed at the mission as well. And one night there was a thump at the door. And when they went to see who was at the door, what was causing that noise, a woman had collapsed on the doorstep. And in her hand was a letter to Philippa from the opera singer. And her husband had died in the war, and she had nothing and nowhere to go. So the sisters agreed to let her live at the mission and to let her work there. Over the next 12 years, she worked there successfully and received her first letter since coming to the mission. It was a letter from a friend back home saying, even after you left Paris, I continued to enter you in the national lottery. You have won 10,000 francs. So the sisters assume Babette will be returning to Paris shortly. And Babette goes to the sisters and says, I've never asked for anything, but I would like to request one thing. I would like to hold a feast for everyone at the mission. And a couple of days later, a boat arrived with the finest foods you could imagine. Champagne, truffles, turtles, doves, other game, cow, and she began to prepare for the feast. When they had the feast, after the meal, everyone went outside and began singing songs of faith, because during the meal, people started confessing their sins. The two sisters had been spinsters. The mission was broke. The brother came to the feast. He had cheated everybody in every business deal he'd ever had. But after the feast and singing songs of hymns, they felt as if they had been washed as white as wool and returned to their innocence. The sisters tell Babette it was a wonderful feast, and she confessed that when she lived in Paris, she worked at Café Anglais, and that she wouldn't be returning to Paris because to feed the people at the mission cost 10,000 francs. That's what the dinner would have cost at Café Anglais. And we've been all told that grace can be found all over the universe. But in our human foolishness and short-sightedness, we imagine that divine grace is finite. But one day, our eyes become open, and we realize the grace from God is infinite. Grace demands nothing from us when we get it from God, or we receive it from others. The unique thing about grace, it costs the giver everything. It costs the receiver nothing. There was a moment of divine grace that occurred through the story of this feast. People were transformed through confession and acceptance. 12 years had gone, and they were living a graceless life until Babette came into their lives. And through her actions, everything she had received from the lottery winning, she had given back to them. It cost Babette everything, and it cost them nothing. Grace is Christianity's best gift to the world because it's given without merit, and it's stronger than vengeance and hatred combined. A colleague once walked in on the agnostic actor W.C. Fields reading the Bible. When he saw the colleague enter, he slammed the Bible shut and said, "I was just looking for some loopholes." What W.C. Fields was probably looking for was grace. If only he'd have read a few more pages, he would have found it. Lewis Sneads was a professor at Fuller Seminary, and he wrote an entire book connecting guilt and grace. For him, guilt was not his problem as he felt it. What he felt most was a glob of unworthiness that he could not tie down to any concrete sin that he was guilty of. But what he needed more than pardon was a sense that God accepted him, that God owned him, that God held him and affirmed him, and would never let him go, even if he had little to offer. He says he identified 3 common sources of his shame: secular culture, attending a graceless religion, and his unaccepting parents. Every institution in the world seems to run on ungrace and a message that you've got to earn your own way, and the only thing you will get is what you work for. That's not how Christianity works. Peter Grave wrote a memoir about his life with leprosy. He had contracted it when he was working in India, and it left him partially paralyzed. He lived in a compound run by nuns. Unable to work and return to society, he thought about suicide. He thought about running away. But he realized if he ran away, he has nowhere to go. And uncharacteristically of him, he woke up early one morning and was walking the grounds. And he heard some voices in the distance. So he followed the sound and found the nuns inside the chapel praying. And what they were doing was they had a list of all the patients on the wall. And they were going one by one, praying to God for them. When he saw his name on the wall, he was overcome by something very profound. It happened inside of him, and it changed his life forever. He felt wanted, and he felt grace. This morning, this is what Jesus is beginning to endure for each of us. In his shame, beating, and death, he is providing to each of us the ultimate grace and forgiveness. My prayer for you this week is that you see that grace is all around you. Any healing, forgiveness, or goodness that you receive this week, it comes solely from the grace of God. C.S. Lewis was working in his office and heard a commotion in the room down the hall. He goes in to see what's going on, and they're arguing about what Christianity's greatest gift is to the world. He looks at all of them and says, that's easy. It's grace. He shut the door and left. There was no need to talk about anything else. Only Christians dare to make God's love unconditional. This week, what are you going to do with God's unconditional love? How are you going to apply His grace and forgiveness to your life? Are you capable of being Christ-like this week by offering grace and forgiveness to those around you who need it? It will provide you with the ultimate freedom if you do. Your grace and forgiveness that you extend this week is still no match for the grace and forgiveness that God has given you. Come next week to Easter with a burden-free heart and celebrate the gifts that Christ has given to you. That's the good news this morning. Thank you.